The real monsters of Pelican Bay, America's deadliest inmates. It was chaos. The kind of chaos that could only come from Pelican Bay, America's most feared prison. The alarm blared through the concrete corridors, red lights flashing as officers rushed toward the SHU, the secure housing unit, where some of the most dangerous men in the country were locked away. Inside one of those tiny gray cells, blood painted the walls. Two inmates, known only as Ghost and Reaper, had turned a simple argument into something unthinkable. Both men were members of rival prison gangs that had been at war for years, and now their hatred had reached its boiling point. Ghost's face was calm, almost cold, as he stood over Reaper, breathing heavily. Officers shouted commands through the steel door, "Get down! Hands where we can see them." But Ghost didn't move. He just stared, his eyes empty. When they finally breached the cell, what they found made even the toughest guards freeze. The kind of violence they saw that day would later be whispered about in every block of Pelican Bay. That was the moment the inmates started calling them the real monsters of Pelican Bay. But how did it come to this? How did a maximum security prison built to control America's most violent men end up breeding something even worse? To understand that, we have to go back to how Pelican Bay became a world of its own, a place where monsters weren't born, they were made. The story begins years earlier, when a new batch of high-risk inmates arrived from different parts of California. Among them was Ghost, a quiet man in his 30s, covered in tattoos that told his life story. No one knew much about him except one thing: he never lost a fight. The guards quickly noticed he didn't talk, didn't smile, and didn't seem afraid of anything. He was the type of man who stared straight into a CO's eyes and didn't blink. The second transfer was Reaper, the complete opposite. Loud, unpredictable, and quick to explode. He'd already done time at multiple prisons and left a trail of chaos behind him. The two men were placed on opposite sides of the SHU, but in Pelican Bay, walls don't stop messages. Notes were passed, alliances formed, and by the end of the first week, the air was thick with tension. Everyone knew a war was coming. Life inside the SHU was nothing like regular prison life. No sunlight. No yard time together. Just 23 hours a day in a concrete box. Meals slid through a slot. Conversations happened through vents. A knock on the wall meant, "I'm alive." A scrape meant trouble's coming. And trouble did come. One night, during a routine meal delivery, the silence broke. A guard heard muffled shouting from inside Reaper's cell. The next sound was something heavy hitting the floor. Moments later, Ghost's voice came through the vent, calm, deliberate. He had it coming. When the door finally opened, the officers weren't ready for what they saw. It wasn't just violence. It was precision. Cold. Calculated. Like Ghost had turned his cell into an execution chamber. That was the night Pelican Bay changed forever. Word spread like wildfire. The inmates began whispering that the real monsters weren't the ones on the outside, they were locked inside with them. The guards started watching their backs more closely. Even the warden ordered emergency lockdowns. The air inside Pelican Bay was thick with fear, and everyone knew something darker was brewing beneath the surface. But what no one knew yet was that Ghost wasn't done. He had one final plan, one that would shake Pelican Bay to its core. And it would begin with a single name, written on a scrap of paper slipped under his cell door. The piece of paper slid under Ghost's cell door just before dawn. No name, no handwriting anyone could recognize, just one word scrawled in pencil: next. Ghost stared at it for a long time. In Pelican Bay, a message like that wasn't a threat. It was a promise. It meant someone had already chosen their target, maybe even him. The SHU was built for total isolation, but the inmates had built their own communication network. Hidden codes, taps through walls, whispers in the vent shafts. Information moved like smoke and nobody could stop it. That morning, officers walked the tier with their usual cold expressions, checking food trays and locks. But even they could feel it. Something had shifted. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper. One of the COs, a rookie barely 2 months into the job, whispered to his partner, "You feel that?" The older guard just nodded. He'd seen this before. Before every major riot, the silence always came first. Ghost sat still, replaying the last words he'd heard from Reaper before the fight. "You're just a myth, man. Let's see what happens when you bleed." He didn't know if that message on the floor came from Reaper's allies or the guards trying to provoke him. But in Pelican Bay, trust was suicide. Later that day, as lunch trays were slid into the cells, a commotion broke out down the tier. Inmate 214, a known member of Reaper's crew, started banging on his door, screaming Ghost's name. "You think it's over? You just made yourself a dead man." Within seconds, alarms rang again. Guards flooded the corridor, shouting commands, pinning the man against the wall, cuffing him hard. But Ghost didn't move. He just sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. His heart didn't race. His breathing stayed calm. It was like he already knew how this would play out. That night, under the hum of fluorescent lights, Ghost reached under his mattress and pulled out something the guards had missed during cell checks. A small metal fragment, sharpened at both ends. It wasn't much, but in Pelican Bay, it was enough to decide life or death. He hid it inside the vent after scratching a tiny symbol beside it. A single cross. Meanwhile, down the hall, inmate 214 was transferred to another block for his safety. But word got around fast. The men in that wing said he didn't make it through the night. The official report said medical emergency. The inmates said otherwise. By the next morning, fear gripped the entire SHU. Guards started doubling up patrols. Cell doors were reinforced. Even the warden came down to address the officers personally, a rare move. "Whatever's happening down here," he said, "ends now. I want total lockdown. Nobody in or out." But it was already too late. That night, a power outage hit the facility. The lights flickered, then went dark. For a moment, there was complete silence, the kind that crawls into your bones. Then through the darkness came a sound that froze every man in his cell, tapping. From wall to wall, vent to vent. Hundreds of taps, echoing like a code only they could understand. Ghost stood up slowly, listening. The rhythm was clear. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. He whispered under his breath, "It's starting." From that moment on, Pelican Bay became a living nightmare. The kind of place where every knock might be the last thing you hear. By sunrise, officers found something new under Ghost's door. Another scrap of paper written in the same hand as before. This time it didn't say next. It said, "It's your turn." And as he stared at those words, Ghost smiled for the first time in years. A slow, cold grin that told the world, the monsters were awake again. The morning after the blackout, Pelican Bay looked like a war zone. Guards were running routine checks, inmates were on edge, and the whole SHU smelled like bleach and fear. Every door clanked open and shut with extra force. Every sound felt heavier. Something terrible had shifted overnight. Even the silence carried weight. Ghost hadn't slept. He sat on his bed, eyes fixed on the new message, "It's your turn." He'd seen fear before, but never directed like this. Someone, or maybe several someones, wanted him to feel hunted. But Ghost didn't scare easily. He had one rule: never react. Reaction gets you killed faster than a weapon in Pelican Bay. At breakfast, guards slid the trays through the slots as usual, but Ghost noticed something strange. His tray had no spoon. It was a small detail, but inside Pelican Bay, small things meant big warnings. Someone on the inside, maybe a guard, maybe another inmate, was signaling that he was being watched. He didn't touch the food. Instead, he sat quietly, listening. Down the tier, a voice shouted, "Ghost? You still breathing?" Followed by laughter. It was Maniac, a notorious shot caller from the Aryan Brotherhood. His laugh echoed down the hall, sharp and taunting. Ghost didn't respond, but he knew what that meant. The gangs had united under one purpose: take him down. Hours later, during the afternoon shower rotation, Ghost was cuffed and escorted down the narrow hallway by 2 guards. The floor was wet, the fluorescent lights flickered. As he walked, he saw writing scratched into the concrete wall. Just 3 words: "Blood calls blood." He knew what was coming. Inside the shower cage, a narrow metal stall with steel bars, Ghost turned around to face the guards as they locked him in. One of them, a young CO named Torres, looked nervous. "Keep your head down, man," Torres whispered quickly before walking away. That was all he needed to know. Moments later, the lights flickered again. Then, darkness. In the silence, Ghost heard movement, fast, quiet, rehearsed. The vents above rattled. Then something fell to the floor outside his cage. A handmade blade slid through a gap. A trap. Someone wanted him to grab it so they could frame him. He didn't move. He just stood there, water dripping down his face, eyes fixed on the vent. Suddenly, a shadow appeared on the other side of the bars. A figure wearing inmate blues, face covered with a torn bedsheet. Ghost couldn't see who it was, but he knew that stance. Slow, confident, deliberate. The kind of confidence only killers have. The figure whispered, "You're not the only monster here." Then, before Ghost could respond, the sound of boots thundered down the corridor. "Lockdown! Lockdown!" Guards stormed the hallway, flashlights cutting through the dark. The masked inmate vanished as quickly as he appeared. When the lights came back on, the only thing left was that same blade lying in front of Ghost, and this time there was blood on it. They dragged Ghost out, restrained him, and threw him into a holding cage while the scene was investigated. Every guard stared at him like they already knew the answer, like he was guilty before the evidence even appeared. The warden arrived minutes later, red-faced, angry. "You think you run my prison?" he growled. Ghost said nothing. The warden leaned closer. "You might have fooled the others, but I know what you are. You're not a man. You're a curse." But what the warden didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Ghost had nothing to do with what just happened. Someone else was moving behind the scenes, turning inmates against each other like pieces on a chessboard. That night in his new cell, Ghost found another scrap of paper tucked into the vent. Same handwriting. Same message style. This time it said, "Checkmate." Ghost clenched the paper in his fist, realizing the truth: this wasn't about revenge anymore. Someone inside Pelican Bay was playing a much deeper game. A game where monsters weren't just fighting each other. They were being controlled. The message "Checkmate" burned in Ghost's mind like a brand. Someone was playing him, using the chaos to stir something bigger, something that even he couldn't control. But who? In Pelican Bay, everyone had a motive: the gangs, the guards, even the warden. Power in that place didn't come from titles. It came from fear. Ghost sat on his bed, the paper still in his hand. He traced the handwriting with his thumb, memorizing every letter. It wasn't from any inmate he knew. The loops, the pressure, it looked too neat, too controlled. Not gang-style scrawl. Whoever wrote it had education and access. That night, when lights went out, he started listening. Pelican Bay never truly sleeps. You can hear whispers, the sound of chains, distant footsteps echoing through concrete. And then, faintly through the vent, a voice. Not the usual inmate chatter, but a low, calm tone. "You think you're awake, Ghost? But you're still in the dark." Ghost froze. The voice was coming from his right vent, an empty cell. That shouldn't be possible. The cell had been vacant since an inmate named Carter died there 6 months ago. Suicide, the guards claimed. But Ghost never believed that story. He leaned closer to the vent. "Who are you?" he whispered. Silence. Then a faint laugh. Not loud, just enough to chill the air. Hours later, when morning came, Ghost was escorted for a brief medical check, standard after an incident. In the hallway he saw something strange, a guard he didn't recognize standing by the infirmary door. No name tag. No badge number. Just a calm stare and a scar running across his cheek. When Ghost passed him, the guard said quietly, "You're making the wrong enemies." Before Ghost could ask anything, another officer pushed him forward. "Keep moving, inmate." That night, the nightmares returned. He saw flashes, Reaper's lifeless face, the blood on his hands, the words, "It's your turn," burned into his mind. But when he woke, his cell wasn't empty anymore. On his bed sat a folded piece of paper, perfectly centered. He opened it. Inside was a drawing, a map of the SHU, detailed, precise, showing routes even guards weren't supposed to know. A red X marked a spot near the maintenance hallway. Written beside it were 4 words, "Come find the truth." It made no sense. How could anyone get into his cell to leave that? The locks, the cameras, everything was supposed to be secure. Unless someone with access had done it. He hid the map under his mattress. Later that day, during routine cleaning, the opportunity came. 2 janitors rolled carts down the tier. One of them an inmate Ghost recognized, named Lucky. They exchanged a quick glance. No words. Lucky tapped twice on his cart, a signal meaning, "Tonight." That night, Ghost waited until the lights went out. Then came the sound, faint, metallic scraping near his vent. A small panel loosened and a voice whispered, "Move." He crawled close, slid his arm through the vent and felt something, a small note wrapped around a nail. He pulled it through and unrolled it. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a list. 5 inmate names. Beside each name, a short description, gang affiliation, cell number, and 1 word written in capital letters, "Dead." One of the names made Ghost's blood run cold. His own. He leaned back, breathing heavily, staring at the paper. The handwriting matched the earlier notes, the same curves, the same pressure. Whoever was behind this wasn't just threatening him, they were predicting deaths like a prophecy. Moments later, a distant alarm echoed down the tier. Guards shouted. Boots pounded the floor. Another cell, just 2 doors down from Ghost, was filled with smoke. When they finally cleared it, the inmate inside, one of the 5 names on the list, was gone. And as the red lights flashed across the corridor, Ghost realized something terrifying. The monsters of Pelican Bay weren't just fighting each other anymore. Someone, maybe inside the system itself, was feeding the violence. Creating monsters, to control monsters. Ghost looked through the slot in his cell door, the flashing lights painting his face red. He whispered, "You want a monster? You just made one." The smell of smoke still clung to the corridor the next morning. The dead inmate's body had been removed hours earlier, but the echo of what happened lingered. Guards walked with their hands closer to their batons, and the inmates, even the lifers, had gone quiet. That kind of silence inside Pelican Bay meant only one thing. Something bigger was coming. Ghost sat on his bunk, staring at the list again. 5 names. 4 left. One of them crossed out in red ink, the man who burned in his cell. Whoever was orchestrating this wasn't just predicting the violence. They were controlling it. Step by step. He turned the paper over and noticed something he hadn't seen before, faint writing on the back, almost invisible until held against the light. "Stop looking or the next one is you." He let out a low breath, calm but steady. Fear was a currency in Pelican Bay, and he refused to pay it. Instead, he started studying the handwriting again. It had a small tremor in certain letters, like the hand of someone older, someone used to writing reports or forms. It hit him. This wasn't an inmate. It was someone who worked there. That afternoon, the warden called for a full inspection of Ghost's block. He stood outside the cells while guards tore through mattresses, ripped vents open, and dumped personal items into bags. Ghost watched him carefully, the warden's posture, the way he avoided looking at certain cells. He wasn't inspecting. He was searching for something. When the warden reached Ghost's door, their eyes met. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he said. Ghost stayed silent. The warden leaned closer. "Every monster meets a bigger one." Hours later, after the inspection ended, Ghost's cell looked like a hurricane hit it. Papers, photos, letters, all gone. But when he lifted his mattress, the map and the list were still there, untouched. Whoever was behind this wanted him to keep following the trail. That night, the power flickered again. For a brief moment, the lights went out completely. When they came back on, Ghost noticed something new, a tiny hole drilled through the bottom of his cell door. Fresh, still dusty. He crouched down and looked through it. Across the tier, a red light blinked, the reflection of a small camera lens. Someone was watching him directly. Minutes later, a guard walked by, pretending not to notice. But Ghost saw it, a faint tattoo on the man's wrist peeking out from under his sleeve. It wasn't a gang symbol. It was a chess piece, a black king. The same symbol drawn at the top of the checkmate note. Ghost's mind raced. Could it be a secret network of guards? Or someone higher, using the inmates as pieces on a board? He had no proof, just whispers and coded warnings. But in Pelican Bay, the line between prisoners and predators was always blurred. 3 cells down, an inmate named Bishop started banging on his door. "They're coming for you, Ghost. You're next." Guards rushed to silence him, but before they reached his cell, Bishop screamed one last time, "They're already inside." Then total silence. Seconds later, the emergency lights turned red. Smoke started filling Bishop's cell. The sound of choking, then nothing. Another alarm. Another name crossed off the list. Ghost backed against his wall, breathing through his shirt. Through the smoke, he could hear the guards shouting for extinguishers, but one voice stood out. Calm, deliberate. The same guard with the chest tattoo. "That's 2 down," the man said quietly into his radio. Ghost's blood ran cold. 2 down. 3 to go. He stared at the vent, whispering to himself, "If they want a monster, they'll get one." He ripped the thin metal panel from the vent, exposing the shaft behind it, dark, narrow, and just big enough for a man to crawl through. Somewhere inside that maze of steel and concrete was the truth. And Ghost was done waiting for it to come to him. He was going to find it, even if it meant becoming the very thing Pelican Bay feared most. The metal groaned as Ghost crawled through the vent, the air thick with dust and rust. Each inch forward scraped his skin, but he didn't stop. Behind him, the chaos of the fire alarms and guards yelling faded into muffled echoes. Inside the ducts, Pelican Bay sounded different, hollow, alive, like the building itself was breathing. He moved slowly, following the faint glow of red lights from the emergency system. Every few feet he paused to listen. Voices carried through the vents, guards, inmates, and somewhere deeper, the low hum of machinery. He recognized the pattern of sounds. He wasn't heading toward the cells anymore. He was moving toward the restricted maintenance wing, a place inmates never saw. The map under his mattress had shown this path. Whoever left it wanted him to find this. After what felt like hours, he reached a grate overlooking a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets and flickering lights. He pried it open and dropped quietly onto the floor. For the first time in years he was outside his cell, not in chains, not supervised, free inside a cage of another kind. He crouched low, checking every corner. On the wall hung a whiteboard with shift schedules, names and codes. One name appeared more than once, Officer Harlan. The same guard with the chest piece tattoo. Next to his name were letters that didn't belong, Ops, R/7. Ghost scanned the room. Then he saw it, a stack of folders stamped with the words Behavioral Modification Program. He flipped one open. Inside were typed pages filled with inmate names, psychological notes, and strange observations. Subject shows increased aggression under sensory deprivation. Another file read, Result, compliant after stage 3. Ghost's name was on the fourth file. Beside it, in red ink, was a single word, active. He froze. This wasn't punishment. It was an experiment. The real monsters of Pelican Bay weren't born by chance. They were being created. Suddenly, a sound echoed from behind, footsteps. Ghost slipped into the shadows as the door opened. Officer Harlan stepped inside, radio in hand. Yeah, lockdown in D-tier is complete, Harlan said. 2 confirmed dead. 1 more on the list before we move to Phase 2. Phase 2. Ghost clenched his fists. He looked around for anything he could use, a pen, a piece of wire, something. Then, as Harlan moved closer to the filing cabinet, Ghost saw the reflection of his own eyes in the metal surface. Calm, focused, deadly. When Harlan reached for a folder, Ghost struck. He grabbed the officer's arm, twisted it behind his back, and yanked him down silently. The guard struggled, but Ghost pressed his hand over his mouth, whispering, Who's behind this? Who's running the program? Harlan's eyes darted toward the door, terrified. You shouldn't even know about this, he gasped. Who? Ghost pressed harder. The guard hesitated, then whispered one name, Director Shaw. Ghost frowned. Shaw wasn't a name he recognized. Where is he? Not here, Harlan coughed. He runs it from Sacramento. He calls it the Purge Line. We test obedience through chaos. You weren't supposed to survive. Ghost's grip tightened. How many have you done this to? Harlan's voice shook. All of them. A radio crackled from Harlan's belt. Unit 4 report. We're heading to the control wing. Cameras just came back online. Ghost's head snapped toward the wall monitor, red lights flashing. He had seconds. He yanked Harlan's keycard, knocked him unconscious with one clean hit, and slipped through the door into the hallway. The deeper he went, the more he saw, doors marked observation, testing, restraint. Inside one window he glimpsed a dark room with rows of monitors showing live footage of inmates. Their cells, their faces, their breakdowns. He realized what this was, a control center for psychological warfare. The voice in his vent, the notes, the list, it was all orchestrated. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the monitors showed his old cell. A figure was standing inside it, staring straight into the camera. The man had the same tattoos, the same build, even the same scar over his left eyebrow. But it wasn't him. Ghost stepped closer, whispering, What the hell? The figure on the screen raised its hand, and held up a piece of paper to the camera. For words written in black ink, You found me finally. Ghost's heart pounded. The lights flickered again, alarms blaring louder this time. Guards were closing in. But he couldn't look away from the screen. The figure smiled faintly, and then the feed cut to black. Ghost took a step back, realizing something far worse than he'd imagined. The real monster of Pelican Bay might not have been made. It might have been cloned. The alarm blared louder, pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat. Red lights flashed across the concrete hallway as Ghost ran, every footstep echoing down the narrow passageways of Pelican Bay's restricted wing. Behind him, guards shouted into radios, Lockdown Sector R. Inmate breach. Inmate breach. But Ghost wasn't running from them anymore. He was running toward something. The image of that figure in his cell, his exact face, his same tattoos, burned in his mind. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a dream. He'd seen it with his own eyes. Whoever this Director Shaw was, he'd done something impossible, something that blurred the line between control and creation. Ghost ducked into a side corridor, swiping Harlan's stolen keycard through a security panel. A green light blinked. The heavy door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large, dimly lit room filled with computers and surveillance monitors. Screens covered every wall, showing every tier, every cell, every inmate. Some feeds were labeled active subject, others dormant. Ghost's eyes scanned the screens until he found it again. His own face still standing inside his old cell. But this time the figure wasn't alone. Two guards stood beside him, one holding a clipboard, the other adjusting something behind his neck, a set of small metal nodes attached to the skin. Electrodes. Ghost leaned closer to the monitor. The other him didn't blink. Didn't breathe heavy. Didn't react to anything. He just stared straight at the camera with that same cold calmness, the same stillness that had once made the guards fear him. Behavioral copy, Ghost whispered. He turned toward the computer terminal and started scrolling through files. One folder caught his attention, Project Mirror. Inside were hundreds of entries, scanned images, psychological profiles, and videos labeled with inmate numbers. Then he found one with his ID. He opened it. A recording played. A man's voice, calm, older, deliberate. Subject 47A, codename Ghost. Replication successful. Neural mapping stable. Stage 4 behavioral sync in progress. Then the voice added something that froze Ghost's blood. Subject remains unaware that his memories were copied prior to containment. He stepped back slowly, shaking his head. No. It wasn't just a clone. It was him. The fights, the anger, the fear, all being used as data to build something that could be controlled, programmed. Pelican Bay hadn't just created monsters. It had manufactured them. Footsteps echoed outside the room. Ghost grabbed a nearby metal pipe, ducking behind a console. Two guards entered, both armed, both tense. You check the monitors, one said. If Shaw finds out we lost containment again, we're... Before he could finish, Ghost lunged from the shadows, slamming the pipe into the first guard's chest. The second reached for his radio, but Ghost moved faster, striking him down with brutal precision. He grabbed the radio and spoke quietly, "This is Unit 4. Situation handled." Then he dropped it, knowing the control team would hear the voice but not realize it wasn't Harlan. He returned to the monitor wall and saw something new. The clone, the other him, was moving. Slowly, deliberately. He picked up the same note Ghost had found earlier and pressed it against the camera again. This time it said, "You're not real." Ghost froze. "What?" he whispered. The clone tilted its head, still staring at the lens. Then, in a movement too precise to be random, it raised its hand and tapped its temple twice. Tap, tap. That was the signal Ghost himself used to send messages through the vents. The alarm shifted tone, a lower, deeper sound. Automatic lockdown sequence. Ghost ran for the exit, but the doors slammed shut. The lights flickered off, replaced by red emergency strobes. Then through the intercom came a voice he'd never heard before, calm, almost proud. "Impressive, Subject 47A. You've lasted longer than any of the others." Ghost looked up at the speaker. "Who are you?" "You already know," the voice replied. "You've met me 100 times, in your head, in your cell, in your reflection. You just don't understand what you are yet." Ghost clenched his fists. "You made me?" "No," the voice said softly. "You made yourself. We just perfected the process." The sound of hydraulic locks clicked behind him. The main door began to open, steam spilling from the hinges. Ghost turned toward it, pipe in hand, ready for whatever was coming. And there, standing in the doorway, under the flickering red light, was the clone. Same face. Same stare. Same scars. Only difference, this version smiled. "Hello, Ghost," it said in his exact voice. "Time to see which one of us deserves to survive." For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other, identical faces reflecting back like a cracked mirror. The alarms wailed overhead, the red lights pulsing across their skin, casting both ghosts in a blood-colored glow. Ghost, the real one, or at least the one who believed he was real, gripped the pipe tighter. The clone took one slow step forward, moving like a machine that had studied him too long. "I know every move you'll make," the clone said, voice calm, controlled. "Because I am you." Ghost circled, eyes never leaving his double. "You're a copy," he said coldly. "And copies break." The clone smirked. "Maybe. But the original is always the experiment." Then he moved, faster than Ghost expected. The first hit cracked against the metal console, sparks flying. Ghost swung back hard, catching the clone across the jaw. The impact echoed through the room. Both stumbled, both recovered. They moved like one, mirrored strikes, mirrored rage. Each punch felt like hitting a reflection that refused to shatter. The clone lunged again, slamming Ghost into the wall. "You were never supposed to know," he hissed. "You were just data, rage, pain, obedience. You're not a man. You're a design." Ghost gritted his teeth, shoving him off. "Maybe they designed me," he said, "but they can't control me." He swung the pipe again, knocking the clone into the glass window that overlooked the control room. The glass cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading out. Ghost stepped closer, panting, both of them bleeding, both of them shaking. "You don't get it," the clone said, laughing weakly. "If you kill me, you die too." Ghost narrowed his eyes. "Then we die on my terms." He grabbed the clone by the collar and slammed him through the glass. Both crashed through, landing hard in the lower control chamber. Sparks burst from shattered screens as they hit the floor. The clone rose first, dazed but still grinning. "They'll just make another me," he said. "Another you. Another monster." Ghost glanced at the console beside him. Dozens of switches, one marked core override with a warning sticker. "System reboot will erase active data." He looked back at the clone. "Then let's make sure they forget us both." Before the clone could move, Ghost lunged for the switch and slammed it down. The room plunged into total darkness. The alarm stopped. For the first time in years, Pelican Bay went silent. Then came the sound, a deep hum rising from the floors, walls trembling. Power surged through the wires. Sparks fell from the ceiling. The clone's voice broke through the chaos, distorted and cracking. "You'll destroy everything." Ghost shouted over the roar. "Good." The light exploded, white, blinding. Then silence. When the power finally returned hours later, the guards found the control wing in ruins. Fires burned through the vents. Hard drives melted into pools of metal. And where the two men had fought, there was no one. Just a burned note fused to the wall. 4 words remained visible under the ash. "No more monsters here." The prison went on lockdown for weeks. Director Shaw vanished. Every trace of the behavioral modification program was wiped from official reports. To the world, Pelican Bay was still just a high-security facility, not a breeding ground for something darker. But inside those walls, stories spread. Some said Ghost escaped through the tunnels beneath the yard. Others swore the clone took his place, walking free under a stolen name. And sometimes on quiet nights, guards claimed they still heard tapping in the vents, slow, deliberate, familiar. Tap, tap. A signal that one of the monsters of Pelican Bay might still be alive. And maybe, still watching. Voices from the inside, where the truth can't be locked away. What would you have done if you were in Ghost's place? Run for freedom or destroy the truth? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share to keep stories like this alive.